Hey everyone, welcome back to the Coach Replay. It's Kim and Cory here again. It's summertime where you are. If you're watching this the first time it's being aired, it's also our final episode of season 5. I can't believe it. We're wrapping up another season, 5 seasons. And we are not going small for this season at wrap up. We are bringing in one of my favorite people to chat with. It's been a minute, as he said earlier before the show. It's been a minute. It's been about a year since I've had a chance to talk with our guest today. And, I think as coaches, conversation skills, how we navigate these conversations, often very vulnerable conversations, our presence in these conversations, how we manage and balance all of the things in our head and that our organization needs from our support and the teachers we're supporting, and then what our teachers need. That takes a lot of skill. And so we have Daniel Stillman here with you. He designs conversations for a living, and he works with other people, showing them how they can do the exact same thing. One of the favorite things that I remember seeing from Daniel was that he said, leadership is this art of creating conditions for transformative conversation, that the conversations are the smallest unit of change, but really we know as instructional coaches in our work and in the executive coaching that you do, Daniel, I know that it may be the smallest unit, but it's the key to that change. It's the biggest impact, I think. So welcome to Coach Replay, Daniel. It's great to have you.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate that I'm somehow the big guns.
Yeah, you are. You are a great conversationalist. So I'm excited because I know we're just gonna have a great chat today.
Thank you. Well, big up to my mom and dad who taught me the arts of conversation around the dining room table. I think I owe it to them.
I love that. I can also, so it's our first time meeting, Daniel. It's great to meet you. My dad also sat my brother and I around the kitchen table. In fact, when we moved out of our childhood home, he's like, "Do you want the table?" Because it was so important to us. So let's start by defining conversational awareness. What does this mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, so it's really it's a great question, Kim, and I didn't expect to start at the kitchen table, but we all have our own sort of approach to how we just do the thing that we all do. But it's like that old joke about the fish and the young fish and the old fish, and the old fish says, "Hey boys, how's the water today?" And the young fish go, "What's water?" Right? Because they've just been in it the whole time. And so conversations are the water that we're in all day, every day. If we're not talking with someone else, we're probably talking to ourselves. We are our inner speech can be clocked. It's really hard to study scientifically, but people have tried. We can talk to ourselves at least 4,000 words per minute. I've heard that there's some people who literally have no voices in their head, or who can't visualize things. There's people.
This morning,
yeah,
someone was like, "I was talking to my husband, and he was just looking off blank." And she's like, "What are you thinking about?" And he's like, "Nothing." She's like,
"Yeah, your mouth." No. But see, this is not. He's not really thinking about nothing. So this is where we talk about conversational awareness. Some men, in order to get through life in the patriarchy, have to numb themselves, and that's just having feelings is not something men are generally allowed to or encouraged to do. But so conversational awareness can, the rabbit hole goes very deep for some of us, right? Because we know that there's at least ourselves. And it actually turns out that the brain, when we are having a conversation with ourselves, the parts of our brain that we're using are the same parts of our brain that we're using when we're talking to another person. So when you're like, "Oh, I better not," or "I shouldn't," it's actually a part of, in a way, it's like it's your mom or it's your dad or it's someone else that you brought inside your head that you're having a conversation with, or an amalgamation of those. So even when we're talking with ourselves, there are multiple parts of us that we're chit-chatting with. And when we're in a conversation with another person, there is them, right? So there's at least me and the other. And then there's what's the whole thing that's happening together that we're here. You can call it the third body or whatever. So at least conversational awareness where some people are just like, hey, how's it going, pal? Like, we're just in the water and we're not thinking about it. Or we're calling somebody to a meeting with, a PowerPoint because that's what we think we're supposed to do. So some people are not aware of the default settings, and there are a lot of default settings in the conversation. But at the least, the base level, I think conversational awareness starts with knowing who you are and what you're bringing to the conversation, being aware of what the other person has going on, trying to sort of feel what's going on for them, and seeing if the third body of the conversation as a whole is it healthy? Is it hot? Is it cold? I like to joke that nobody has a conversation thermometer or speedometer. They don't exist, but all of us have our own conversation thermometer or speedometer that was probably calibrated at the dining room table, right? This conversation's too hot. This conversation's too slow. This conversation's too fast. We got to speed things up. So I think everyone is aware of conversations, but they're just running on their own default settings. My advocacy is just like, be aware that everyone else has probably got a different set point than you, is probably seeing something different than you. And so, it's that there's like so many tropes about this. It's like the real challenge with communication is the illusion that it's happened. The fact that I'm thinking at 4,000 words per minute while I'm talking to you, I'm talking at about 100 words per second, per minute rather. Your brain capacity, Kim, is sufficient at about 120 bits per second. You can pay attention to me, and your brain is thinking of stuff, and that's happening all the time. And so to me, the other aspects of conversational awareness is just being empathetic to ourselves and other people at the incredible unlikeliness that real communication, real conversation can happen, given that huge gap. I can speak at 4,000 words per minute. I can speak at 100, 125. I have not said all I can say about something. No one has ever, anybody you've ever spoken to has ever expressed everything that they could say about something. And yet we go on to thank you for that, let's go on to the next thing, assuming that we've heard everything that they have to say. And so to me, conversational awareness, like if you just know the facts of conversations, it's very humbling. And I think it calls to me, and it calls to all of us who start to become aware of conversations and how fragile and important they are, to slow them down and to be more loving and precious with them in some way. Not precious like, not like Gollum from the Lord of the Rings precious, or not precious like, treating them delicately, but like they're valuable. And a good one is unlikely. Sorry, that was a bit of a rant. I hope there was something good in there for you, Bill.
I mean, yes, there were a lot of good things. I think that the part that's interesting to me, if we go back to like the kitchen table analogy, is that your kitchen table was different than mine. And so the conversations that we have, and we just, everybody kind of has these different ideas of what conversation should look like. And then we're sitting together, and I have my agenda in my mind and you have your agenda in your mind. And then, what happens from there. So it's a very interesting thought.
Yeah. And if we just take those three elements of conversational awareness, like me, you, and us, or we, my understanding of me, like what kind of what do I think a person is? Like, am I aware of my body? Am I in touch with my emotions? My therapist sort of trained me in internal family systems, this idea of parts work. Like, I know that I have parts, and I know that my parts have various needs and wants. If you're familiar with transactional analysis, like there's at least a child and a parent and an adult in me. And if that's my mental model, then I'm going to look at someone through that lens. I'm going to see someone else that way. But if you just think like I'm a brain in a jar, which some people also think we are, then you're going to treat the conversation in a different way. If you think like it's a very, I know something and you don't, then I'm going to treat the conversation in a very different way, right? If I think like if my model of what education is, like that's the sort of the meta theme around here. So if I think my job is to like fill your cup versus expand the size of your vessel, it's going to be a very, very different conversation. I had a coaching client say to me recently, like, I want you to teach me. And I'm like, I think we have different models of what it means to teach someone something, right? Me telling you something is actually not teaching you something, right? So that's like, I mean, that's a special case of conversations is a large, the universe of conversations. You're like, oh, what do I think the arc of beginning, middle, and end of teaching somebody is, right? So that's where my conversational awareness comes in very differently and weighs me down sometimes, is that I'm like, I can't tell somebody anything. Like, they have to discover it for themselves. Like, that's how you teach somebody something. And I'm aware of my own desire to tell. I'm aware of my own desire to push, because I've done that introspective work. So to me, I say conversational awareness is like, it starts with your understanding of yourself. Do you know what it feels like to be in your body and to know I'm worried or I'm concerned and I feel that on my chest, or I feel anxious, and is it me or is it the room? Like, this is something I often teach. Am I feeling anxious, or is the room anxious? Is someone else anxious? Am I just guessing that they're anxious and I'm just mirroring their anxiety? Yeah.
Well, it goes back to like the three parties in the conversation. I think like my perception of me and my perception of you, if we were to flip into your brain, how aligned are those? And so it reminds me of the importance, as we're starting coaching partnerships, if these conversations are happening in a coaching partnership, of really just making sure that we invest time in having conversations about how do you learn, how do you teach, what are your expectations for how we collaborate together, because we know, like, what are you bringing? Tell me about your kitchen table, which I think is so apt that I have a kitchen table behind.
Look at that. It's a nice size kitchen table, Cory. I like that. That's a dining room table, I think. You've got candles there.
She's an antique. I very much like her. But yeah, it makes me think that. And I also am reminded of, we had our last guest on last month, Kelly Garris, talked about this idea of, your coaching identity. What is your coaching identity, and how does that fit into the situation of the school and the organization and the needs of the person that you're meeting with? And I think it's, how does that also fit into the conversations that you have, and what parts of your other identities outside of coaching are you bringing into that? I was trained in personality psychology, and I was trained to look at body language and facial expressions and glean specific kinds of emotions from those. So when someone leans back and crosses their arms, I'm immediately thinking, ooh, I might have hit something. They might have just been trying to get comfortable, but I'm bringing in some. But my coaching identity is, I want our coaching to feel, I want it to be productive. For both you and I am a believer that you have the answers inside you, like that idea of what is teaching. But I also hope to learn from it as much as I want to support your growth. Expand your vessel. I loved that you said that. And I want to have conversations that feel organic and authentic. Like, we're sitting at the kitchen table, having some iced tea if it's hot, or some coffee if you hadn't slept well. And we have this great conversation, but it's still really productive. It still meets the needs that we have as professionals. And so a little bit of what I play with that is, I think vulnerability plays a big piece of that, in that those introductory conversations as we're getting to know each other, but then also as we think about, who is Kim today versus Kim yesterday? Did she get enough sleep? Does she have other things going on in her life? What about me? What about you? So what does vulnerability play in having those authentic yet productive conversations for coaching?
It's a really interesting question, Cory, because in one way, coaching is not an equal relationship for two reasons. One, I think we have to acknowledge that people come into the coaching relationship as coachees with different expectations. Some people really do, and I felt this: fix me, tell me, fill my cup. right? My cup is not runneth over, it runneth empty. And so some people do come wanting that and being empathetic to that. I think, it's like if you go out to coffee with a friend and they just talk the whole time and don't like sort of halfway through the chat be like, oh, I've just been talking your head off, Cory. Tell me what's going on with you. And then like they presumably should step back, right? And that's like in a friendly social conversation. And if they never do that, like you'll probably be like, oh my God, that Kim, she just is a chatterbox, and maybe you're not going to say yes to that invitation next time. So similarly, I think like what's the correct amount of me talking versus them talking? I actually use a piece of software. I swear I'm going to answer your question as best as I can, but I'm going to loop around. There's a piece of software I use that shows me at the end of my coaching calls what percentage I've spoken versus they've spoken. And if I've spoken more than them, I'm like, what did I do wrong today? And it happens sometimes. It's like, 55, 45. I have one client where it's like 70, 30. And it's actually a little frustrating for me because I'm like, I didn't get an word in edgewise today. Did I help? Did I really help? But to them,
what did I do?
Yeah, what did I even do? Was I even there? Right? I mean, if it was 90-10, like I suppose they could have just been by themselves. I've never achieved 90-10.
80-20 once.
Yeah. Oh, so you look at your numbers too, right?
We do.
So,
yeah, Kim and I do.
You said one time.
She's not. One time. It was a glorious day.
It was a glory. I feel like most of that coaching conversations were about 80-20 once we got rolling, but
that's
80.
impressive. Right. So, I mean, when a client starts off with like, how are you doing? Like it's a very, it's kind of a reflex. I think it's just something you say to people. And if I say, I'm having a rough day, like, I don't think that serves them. This is their call.
Right.
I could give them all the details. Now, I also don't want to bright side them. Like, so I have to say something, obviously, but I try to say as little as possible because it's about them. I'm like, hey, I'm really excited that it's spring. Thanks for your flexibility in the last call. I had a great trip with my wife. Like, let's get started. How are you? How are you really doing? Now, I feel like it's their call, and I don't want to bring in my the Yiddish word is mishigas. I don't know if that translates universally, but it's like I don't want to bring all the craziness that's in my life. I just leave that outside the room. That said, I think asking if a story would help, like in coaching, to say like, I understand that this is a challenge. Would it be helpful if I shared some of the challenges that I've had with this? I could share a story of my own challenges with this if it would be helpful. And I think that's where they can say like, yeah, that would be really helpful. Like, thank you for that. Or they might say like, I mean, this almost never happens. Like, no, I don't want your stories. Shut up, Stillman.
I feel like Kim can do that to me sometimes. She knows where my stories go.
Yeah,
sometimes.
But to me, like vulnerability and authentic conversations in general, really important. Like if we're talking about a leader and a team, people often talk about like leaders going first. And like if you're doing a check-in about like, are we red, yellow, or green? Like the stoplight check-in, to just say like, hey, actually, I'll sometimes tell people if it's a more social call, I'm like, hey, I'm a little tired, but I'm glad to see you, right? So I think going first and showing that vulnerability can be helpful if it's the right context, if it serves the overall body of the conversation, if it serves them, right?
We don't make it awkward.
This is why I have a therapist and a men's group and a group of other coaches that I meet with my coaching group of coaches for a day a month. I meet with my men's group for 2 hours a week, therapy once a week, because I have other places where I can get the help and the support that I need, so that I don't have to burden, my other relationships with all of that, and certainly my coaching relationships. I'd like to bring the right amount of me so that they feel comfortable to bring as much of themselves as possible.
I love that. Like, specifically, I am taking away today the request to share,
Mm-hmm.
because at my kitchen table, it was all about relating.
Yeah.
And we always call it one-upping sometimes. Like,
Right.
Mhm.
It's like
I
a
will
scar
sometimes
conversation. Ooh, I have this scar. Oh, well, this.
yeah, oh, yeah, me too. And then I'm gonna, and we're all flexing,
Mhm.
and but I will, like, that has always been something that I have tried to be aware of, because I want to show the vulnerability.
Yeah.
But again, sometimes that then comes off on the other side as me, like, taking away from their story. Like, I just took, oh yeah, I see your story, and here's my story. It's not about my story. And so I really struggle with, like, that knee jerk to interrupt and relate, add some of that, and through vulnerability. But it really isn't always helpful. And so
No.
if I do feel like it may be, I can still ask, instead of then staying awake late at night going, oh my gosh, I can't believe I told them that. I hope it was helpful.
Right. Because we're telling them that because we want to show that we get it. We're trying to show, like, not just vulnerability, but like we're in it with them. We want to show them that we empathize with them, and we want to help, and we want to solve the problem. But that none of those things are coaching.
That leads
I love his face at the end of that. He's like, sorry, Cory.
No, but we've all done it, right? But so one of the things I learned from my coaching mentors, you only coach with permission, even inside of a coaching call.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so when someone's like saying the problem, you're like, hey, do you want some coaching around that? And they go, yeah. And they're like, cool. Well, let's strap in. Right. So the same thing is like, can I tell you a story that might be helpful? They'll say yes. And they'll say, well, first, roll back. That hits you, Kim. Tell me about that. I love that.
I like that. And someone you have a strong relationship with will say, maybe not that. Maybe I don't need that right now.
Yeah. Yeah. They might say, oh, I want to think it through on my own first.
Yeah. Well, and that leads to, I wish we had more time with you. Another season, you'll have to come back, because one of, like, my favorite things, one of the things that kind of drew me to you initially, I mean, so way backstory, if I can tell when. We found Daniel. I was part of the Better Together conference that we did last year. He's one of our keynote speakers. And when I came across your profile and your work, Daniel's written, the Good Talk, he's author of Good Talk, Conversation Factory podcast host, all these good things. But a lot of your content, especially on your blog, which folks will be able to access from our takeaways today, is around, like, these different styles of coaching, which I think really lead themselves very well to education. But this idea of, like, your coaching path versus your consulting path. And so again, like, we can call it coaching all we want, but is it truly coaching? And I think the conversation tells us a lot. And so being aware throughout that conversation and being reflective, using tools that will tell you your rate of speech, your talk time of you, and your those are really powerful things. Kim and I have really been leveraging those a lot lately. So maybe we can have you back sometime to talk about that consulting versus coaching, like figuring out what path you're right now, and how to transition even maybe from one to another.
No, happily. And we can share a link to, because after the keynote, I wrote up, took some of those diagrams, but I mean, very briefly, it's like the 2x2 matrix is asking versus telling, and they're sort of a problem focused or a past focused or a future focus or a solution focus. And I don't think there's anything wrong with telling somebody the problem they're having and telling them the solution to that problem if you really, really know. We like to joke that that's the McKinsey path. It's actually a great way to make a lot of money, is like sell people the problem and then sell people the solution. That's like what the Mad Men did in the 60s. It's like, well, actually what you need is something called conditioner, because your hair isn't conditioned. And here's some conditioner to condition your hair, and creating that need. But I think radical candor is really valuable, telling people the problem that they're having if you really know. But most cases, I think, if we're talking about coaching and we're talking about instructional design, it's about helping people find their own path. Mm-hmm. Because we believe that they're going to find something that's going to be more innovative, more interesting, more different than we would have found than the standard path. Otherwise, there'd be some training for it. Mm-hmm. So to me, it's just moving from asking to getting them to tell us about the future that they want to create. But yeah, well, I'll put a link. I mean, presumably they can
the takeaways.
Some of that.
Yeah, be sure to follow Daniel. Check out his blog. So many good things, and just so many good things, Daniel. I really appreciate it. I love that every time I talk to you, I learn something new. So it awakens my conversation.
I learn something new every time I talk with you, Cory.
Well, wonderful. I love this. And then you should talk to Kim more. I learned a lot from her.
No.
Well, thanks so much for joining us for our final episode of the season. I knew it was going to be a good one. Be sure to download the takeaways for those who are watching and tune in next season with us. But Daniel, thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you all again soon.
Thank you so much for having me. I hope everyone has some better conversations in their lives by being more sensitized to what they're all made of.
I love it. All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye.